It is the newly released body cam video showing cops arriving at the Santa Fe home of Gene Hackman and his wife.
Yeah, I don't know, bro. I don't see any, blunt force trauma.
The front door was ajar. Not broken, not forced, just open, swinging loose on its hinges in the cold February air of Santa Fe, New Mexico, like someone had stepped out in a hurry and never come back. Two maintenance workers noticed it first. They'd come to the property expecting a routine job. No answer at the door, no movement inside. They called security. Security looked through a window, and what they saw inside that house set off one of the strangest investigations in the American Southwest in years. What they found in the days that followed, and what the medical examiner would later describe in language so careful, so deliberately chosen, it felt almost like a warning, has never been fully told. Not the real version, not the version that actually holds up, because a story did spread. A massive one. It had over 800,000 views within days. It claimed FBI agents had broken through a sealed underground structure beneath the mansion. It claimed a tunnel. It claimed 701 bodies. It spread across TikTok, X, Threads, and a dozen other platforms before fact-checkers could catch up. People believed it. Millions of people shared it, and none of it was true. What was true, what was actually documented, sworn to in a detective's affidavit, stated by the chief medical examiner at a public press conference, is something far harder to explain than a tunnel full of bodies. Because the real story doesn't have a villain, it doesn't have a conspiracy, it has something worse. It has an ordinary house on a quiet hilltop where two people died weeks apart and nobody noticed. That's where this story begins, not underground, on the ground floor, behind that open front door, on a cold Wednesday afternoon in February. The property at 1425 Old Sunset Trail sits in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, northeast of Santa Fe. 13,000 square feet, 53 acres, a 360-degree view that stretches all the way to Colorado on a clear day. The house is 2 stories of pale stucco, part adobe, part Spanish Baroque, the kind of architecture that looks like it grew out of the land rather than being placed on it. Gene Hackman had lived there for decades. He moved to Santa Fe partly because the city, in his own words, had a kind of magic in it. He wasn't being poetic. He meant it literally. The altitude, the light, the way the mountains change color at dusk. He rebuilt the property from a 1950s block structure into something designed to last. New ceiling beams, 90% of the roof stripped and raised, rare plants in the garden, a putting green, a hot tub, a 6-car garage. He also built in privacy. The estate sits inside a gated community called Santa Fe Summit. Security patrols it. Cameras log entry and exit at the gate. To get to the front door of the main residence, you have to pass through 2 layers of access control. Hackman had retired from acting in 2004, more than 2 decades before his death. He had stopped giving interviews. He had stopped making public appearances. Maintenance workers told investigators they rarely saw him. Most contact was handled by phone or text. Stand there now, on that hilltop, and try to imagine what it felt like inside in February 2025. The Hinges Mountains to the west, the Sangre de Cristos at your back, the sky, wide and pale and cold. Inside, no television cameras, no staff, no alarm that anyone on the outside could hear. The property registered not in Gene Hackman's name, but in the name of a trust, a legal entity called the Trustee of Edgar Gross, a layer of privacy so deliberate that investigators initially couldn't confirm whose house they were standing in. 2 maintenance workers arrived on February 26, 2025, at approximately 1:43 in the afternoon. Roland Lowe Begay and Jesse Kessler. They'd been there before. They knew the property. They told investigators they hadn't seen the homeowners in about 2 weeks, which they described as not unusual. Most communication was done remotely, but something was different that day. The front door was open. There's no other way to say it. That open door is where the real story starts. What investigators found inside would require 7 weeks of forensic analysis, 1 press conference that the medical examiner described as unprecedented, and a set of facts so strange that the internet filled the gap with something it felt more comfortable with: a tunnel, a secret, a crime. The truth was quieter, sadder, and far more difficult to process. Here's what was actually in that house. The front door was ajar. That phrase appears in the official affidavit sworn by Detective Roy Arndt of the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office, and it's the first signal that something was wrong. Not the broken window, not the damaged lock, the open door. No forced entry anywhere on the property, no signs of a struggle, nothing rummaged, nothing ransacked. Deputy Thomas entered first. To the left of the front door, immediately, was a bathroom. The door was open. On the floor, on her right side, dressed in dark gray sweatpants and a light-colored sweatshirt, was Betsy Arakawa. A black space heater lay near her head. The heater appeared to have fallen. An open prescription bottle sat on the countertop above her, pills scattered across the surface. She had been there a while. The body showed signs of decomposition. Deputies continued through the house. In the bathroom closet, about 10 to 15 feet from Arakawa, they found the body of a German shepherd named Zinna. The dog had died of severe dehydration and starvation. Zinna was a shelter dog who had been especially close to Arakawa. She had stayed by her owner's side until she couldn't anymore. Gene Hackman was found in a different part of the house entirely, the mudroom near the back. On the floor, his walking cane and a pair of sunglasses beside him. Deputies noted he appeared to have fallen suddenly. The way you fall when something happens without warning, and your body doesn't have time to brace. No wounds, no external trauma, no signs of forced entry, no carbon monoxide. The gas company was called that night to test every line in and around the property. They found no leaks. They did, however, issue 5 red tags, 5 separate code violations in the home's gas infrastructure. The sheriff's office was careful to note that those violations are not believed to be a factor in the deaths. Careful language again. The affidavit classified the deaths as suspicious, not because of evidence of violence, but because of the circumstances. 2 people, dead in separate rooms. A dog, dead in a closet. An open door, bodies that had clearly been there for an extended period. Suspicious enough in nature to require a thorough search and investigation, the warrant reads. That is the language of a detective who doesn't know what they're looking at yet. The search warrant was executed at 9:30 that night. A 2025 monthly planner, medical records, 2 green cell phones, still locked, thyroid medication, diltiazem, a drug for blood pressure and heart conditions. Everything bagged, logged, and removed from the house. None of it would answer the central question: when did they die, and why did no one know? There is a machine inside Gene Hackman's chest that outlived him, a pacemaker, a small device that monitors and corrects the rhythm of the heart. It logs events. It keeps timestamps. And when investigators asked the pathologist to query its memory, it told them something that the investigation had no other way of knowing. The last event recorded was February 17, 2025, 9 days before the bodies were discovered. According to the pathologist, I think that is a very good assumption, that was his last day of life, Sheriff Aiden Mendoza told reporters. He was careful not to say it outright, but the implication was clear. Gene Hackman had been dead for more than a week before anyone looked through that window. Betsy Arakawa had died before him. Based on the timeline the medical examiner pieced together, she died first, on or around February 11th. Hackman survived her by roughly 6 days, and this is where the story becomes almost impossible to process. Because Hackman had Alzheimer's disease, advanced Alzheimer's, he was 95 years old, and he was losing his grip on reality in the most literal, clinical sense. The autopsy confirmed the Alzheimer's as a significant contributing factor in his death, not because it killed him directly, but because it may have prevented him from understanding what had happened, from knowing she was gone, from knowing to call for help. The medical examiner's report noted signs of prolonged fasting, the kind of fasting that doesn't happen by choice, but by incapacity, by not knowing you're hungry, by not knowing what day it is, by sitting in a house on a hilltop in New Mexico in February, with your wife dead in the bathroom and a dog dead in a closet, unable to understand what any of it means. No one called, no one came. The gate logs showed entries and exits, but nothing that raised an alarm. The phone records were still being analyzed. The planner was still being reviewed. If you're finding this difficult to sit with, that's the right response. A like truly helps this channel continue investigating these stories. Now back to the timeline, because it gets harder. On March 9th, 2025, less than 2 weeks after the bodies were found, a YouTube channel called The Ultimate Discovery uploaded a video. By the time fact-checkers at Snopes caught it, the video had over 800,000 views. The claim: FBI agents had discovered a secret tunnel beneath Hackman's mansion. Inside the tunnel, 701 bodies. Strange symbols on the walls. Iron doors sealed from the inside. Snopes investigated. They found no evidence to support any of it. No credible news outlet had reported on it. The channel itself carried a disclaimer that its content was intended solely for entertainment purposes, and mixed facts, rumors, and fiction. Rated false. Clearly, demonstrably false. But here's the part worth sitting with. Why did 800,000 people click on it? Not because they were stupid. Not because they wanted to believe Gene Hackman was a secret villain. They clicked because the real story, the verified, documented story, was already deeply unsettling in ways that didn't have a clean explanation. 2 people, dead in separate rooms, a locked gate, a 9-day gap, a house that functioned as a fortress of privacy, an estate registered under a trust name, 5 red tags from the gas company, a dog that starved to death, waiting for someone to come. The rumor gave people a shape to put around something that felt shapeless. A tunnel is a concrete thing. A sealed iron door is something you can picture. 701 bodies is a number that explains the dread. The actual truth: an elderly man with Alzheimer's disease surviving his wife for 6 days in a house no one checked on doesn't have a villain to point at. There's no one to be angry with. And that, psychologically, is often harder to accept than a conspiracy. The tunnel wasn't real. What it was pointing at was. The isolation was real. The silence was real. The fact that a maintenance worker's sense that something was odd was the only tripwire that existed. That was real. And when investigators described the deaths as requiring accurate dissemination of important information, they weren't covering something up. They were announcing that what happened here was strange enough to require a public explanation. That phrasing came directly from Dr. Heather Jarrell, New Mexico's chief medical examiner, at a press conference on March 7, 2025. Her exact words: "It is unprecedented for the Office of the Medical Investigator to make public statements about death investigations." However, the circumstances surrounding these 2 deaths require accurate dissemination of important information. Unprecedented. That word, from a medical examiner. That word deserves more attention than a fictional tunnel. The cause of Betsy Arakawa's death was hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. If you've never heard of it, that's part of the point. It's rare enough that many physicians in the United States have never seen a case in person. Hantavirus is carried by rodents, deer mice specifically, in their droppings, their urine, their saliva. You don't contract it from a bite, you contract it from breathing, from disturbing contaminated dust in a confined space, from a closet or a storage area, or a crawl space where rodents have nested without anyone knowing. The New Mexico high desert, especially at altitude, is one of the regions of the United States with documented hantavirus activity. It's not common anywhere, but it's not unheard of there. The pest control worker, one of the 2 men who discovered the bodies, had been called to the property because of a pest issue. The details of what kind of pest weren't disclosed, but the maintenance workers told investigators they rarely saw the homeowners, and most contact was remote. Whatever had been living in that house, in whatever corner or crawl space or sealed interior, had been living there long enough to matter. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome has a mortality rate of roughly 35 to 40% once symptoms appear. Symptoms can look like flu at first: fever, muscle aches, fatigue. Then, the lungs begin to fill. There's a window in which treatment can help, but that window requires knowing what you're dealing with, and it requires someone to notice that you're sick. No one noticed. Or rather, no one was there to notice. Arakawa died on or around February 11th. She was 65 years old. She was a concert pianist who had given up her career to live in that hilltop house with her husband. She was, by all accounts, the more physically capable of the 2, the one who managed the household, the one who maintained what little connection the couple had to the outside world. And then she was gone. Gene Hackman, at 95, with advanced Alzheimer's and severe heart disease, was left alone. This is where the story stops being a mystery and becomes something else entirely. The skeptic's position on this story is reasonable. 2 elderly people died of natural causes, one from a rare but documented virus, one from heart disease complicated by dementia. Tragic, yes. Unusual, perhaps, but not mysterious, not suspicious, not worthy of the breathless coverage it received. That position is largely correct, and it's worth saying clearly: there was no tunnel, there was no FBI raid, there was no cover-up. The deaths were investigated thoroughly, the results were disclosed publicly, and the medical examiner's findings were consistent with natural causes in both cases. But not suspicious and not strange are not the same thing. What the record actually shows is a set of circumstances that are statistically rare in combination, even if each element is individually explicable. A 95-year-old man with Alzheimer's, alone, without supervision, without daily check-ins from family or hired care, surviving a week or more after his wife's death without triggering any welfare system. A property so private that even the security gate logs weren't enough to reveal that the residents were dead. A hantavirus death in a high-altitude estate where, apparently, rodents had established a significant enough presence to warrant a pest control visit. 5 red tags on the gas infrastructure. The gas company noted these were not believed to be a factor in the deaths, but 5 red tags is not a passing grade. 5 red tags means 5 things in that house needed attention. The medical examiner held a press conference to clarify because the circumstances were unusual enough that the public deserved it. That is not a standard step. That is an institution deciding that a situation requires extra transparency. And the language Dr. Jarrell used, unprecedented for her office to comment publicly, suggests she understood what she was stepping into. None of this is a conspiracy, but none of it is ordinary either. Step back from the house for a moment. Step back from the planner, the pacemaker, the prescription bottles on the counter. Step back and look at the shape of what happened. Gene Hackman retired from acting in 2004. He was 74 years old. He moved to Santa Fe, gave a few interviews, and then, gradually, deliberately, withdrew from public life entirely. Not in a bitter or dramatic way, in the way of someone who had given a very long portion of themselves to a very public life, and who had decided that the remainder of that life would be his own. He was 95 when he died. That means he had more than 2 decades of private life after a very public career. Most of that time was spent on that hilltop, with Betsy, with their dogs, with the mountains. The property was registered under a trust. There was no surveillance system that investigators could find. A deliberate absence in a house that size, which is remarkable. He had no social media. He gave no interviews. He did not attend industry events. When he won his second Academy Award for Unforgiven in 1993, he was already suggesting he might be done. He kept going for another decade. Then he stopped, and he stayed stopped. There are at least 2 ways to read that kind of retreat from the world. The first is the obvious one, a man who earned his privacy, who built a life he loved, and who spent his final years exactly where he wanted to be. That reading is probably correct. His own words across various interviews support it. He wasn't fleeing anything. He was choosing something. The second reading is the one the viral video reached for, clumsily. The idea that a man who disappears that completely must be hiding something. That the walls around the estate were not just for privacy, but for concealment. That the lack of surveillance, the trust name on the deed, the sealed gate, that these things pointed inward towards something dark rather than outward towards something peaceful. The second reading was wrong, but it wasn't generated from nothing. It was generated by the same human instinct that looks at a locked room and assumes there's a secret inside, rather than a person who simply wanted a room that locked. It was generated by a cultural reflex that reads famous people's retreat as guilt rather than exhaustion, and it was fed, in this case, by the genuine strangeness of what was actually inside that house. Not a tunnel, not bodies, but 2 people who had been dead for more than a week, and whom the world had simply not noticed. One theory that circulated, apart from the viral video, was that Hackman's decades of military service, he enlisted in the Marine Corps at 16 and served 4.5 years, had given him a kind of operational secrecy that lingered into old age, that the gated property and the trust-registered deed and the no surveillance policy were habits formed in a different era, habits of a man who had learned to compartmentalize and contain. That theory is unprovable. It's also not unreasonable. Another, darker reading focuses not on Hackman, but on the systems around him. He was 95 years old. He had Alzheimer's. His wife was the one who managed their connection to the outside world. When she died, that connection died with her. Not because anyone was negligent in a criminal sense, but because no welfare system, no neighbor, no family mechanism was in place to catch a man in his condition when the person who was, functionally, his last link to the world was gone. The 2 healthy dogs found on the property survived. The German Shepherd in the closet did not. That's a different kind of failure. It's slower and quieter, and has no single person to blame for it. On January 17, 2026, almost a year after the deaths, the estate at 1425 Old Sunset Trail was listed for sale through Sotheby's International Realty. Price, $6.25 million, 53 acres, a 6-vehicle garage, multiple outdoor spaces, perfect for meditation, entertaining, or admiring the sunset. The listing describes the architect's signature style, the mountain views, the flowing indoor-outdoor spaces. It does not mention Gene Hackman. It does not mention Betsy Arakawa. It does not mention Zinna, the German Shepherd who was found in the bathroom closet. It describes the property as a high desert estate, with expansive views from the Jemez Mountains all the way to Colorado. Someone bought it. The purchase price was not disclosed. There's something about the silence of that sale that lands differently than the viral rumor ever did. A house where 2 people spent the last decades of their lives. A house designed for privacy, built for permanence, filled with rare plants and art and the weight of a long marriage, packaged, photographed by a drone, and listed on a luxury real estate website, available for viewing by appointment. The maintenance worker who found the front door ajar on February 26th has never been publicly identified by name in any official statement. The security officer who looked through the window and called 911 has not given interviews. The planner, the 2025 monthly planner collected as evidence, has never been described in detail. What Hackman wrote in it, if anything, remains part of an investigation record that the public has not seen. The cell phones were still locked when investigators took them. We'll be analyzing cell phone data, phone calls, text messages, events, photos, the sheriff said at his press conference, to try to piece a timeline together. What they found has not been disclosed. There is a version of this story where all of that is simply the ordinary closure of a private life. The planner is a medical appointment and a grocery list, and a reminder about a dog's vet visit. The phones are nothing. The timeline is exactly what the pacemaker said it was, and the house on the hilltop held no more secrets than any house holds, just the quiet accumulation of years, and at the end, the accumulation of silence. That version is probably the true one, but the version that spread, the one with the tunnel and the iron doors and the 701 bodies, tells us something true about ourselves, even if it tells us nothing true about Gene Hackman. It tells us that we are more comfortable with a dark secret than with a quiet, overlooked death, that we would rather have a villain than a vacuum, that when a man of enormous talent and fame dies in a house no one checked on, for more than a week, with his wife already gone and his dog starving in a closet, we reach for conspiracy because the alternative asks us to look at something uncomfortable, not at Gene Hackman, at ourselves, at the systems we have or don't have, for people who are old and isolated and brilliant and famous and completely alone on a hilltop with an open door and no one on the other side. That's the discovery no one expected. Not a tunnel, not iron doors, not 800,000 views worth of darkness beneath the foundation. Just an open door and what it means that no one walked through it. Two versions of this story are going to live in the internet forever now. The tunnel version and this one. The tunnel version has better thumbnails. It has a scarier title. It has the number 701, which is specific enough to feel real and large enough to feel monstrous. It spread further, faster, and louder than any fact check could follow. This version has an open front door, a pacemaker timestamp, a word, unprecedented, from a medical examiner who didn't have to say anything at all, but chose to. You can decide which version asks more of you. What we know for certain, documented and signed and entered into the public record, is this. Gene Hackman was 95 years old and died of heart disease complicated by Alzheimer's. Betsy Arakawa was 65 and died of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, most likely contracted in the house they shared. She died first. He survived her. For roughly 6 days, he was alive and alone in that house on the hilltop, and the world went about its business. No one has explained why no welfare check was triggered sooner. No one has fully addressed the 5 red tags on the gas system. The locked cell phones and the 2025 planner remain, as far as public record shows, undetailed. The estate has sold. The new owners have not made public statements. Dr. Jarrell's press conference was described as unprecedented. It was also, for all the detail it provided about cause of death, quiet about the question that lingers longest. How does this happen? Not in the criminal sense, in the human sense. How does a man die alone in a 14-room house, in a gated community, in a country with every conceivable form of communication, and not one person on Earth knows he's gone for 9 days? That question has no tunnel underneath it, no iron door, no mystery that a YouTube video can resolve. It just sits there, on a hilltop in the Sangre de Cristos, in the cold February light. Leave a comment with what you think the most significant, overlooked detail of this case was. The one thing that nobody talked about enough. Because there are several, and some of them are still waiting for someone to look at them clearly.